They say a name is just a word until it reminds someone of the day their entire life changed forever. At exactly 9:12 on a cool Monday morning, the revolving glass doors of Sterling Dynamics welcomed another stream of applicants hoping to find work inside one of America's most admired technology companies. Expensive shoes clicked across polished marble floors. Executives hurried toward elevators with steaming coffee in hand. Recruiters scanned digital resumes without lifting their eyes. No one noticed the man quietly stepping through the entrance carrying a worn canvas folder and wearing the only navy button-down shirt he owned. Ethan Walker paused for just a second, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves before taking a slow breath. He had learned long ago that dignity wasn't something another person handed you. It was something you carried, even when life had taken almost everything else away. The security guard glanced at his application and then at Ethan's faded work boots. "Janitor interviews are downstairs," he said without looking up again. Ethan simply smiled. "Thank you, sir." There was no resentment in his voice. No embarrassment, just quiet respect. As he followed the hallway toward human resources, conversations continued around him as though he didn't exist. A pair of young employees stepped aside without apology. One whispered that the cleaning applicants seemed to arrive earlier every year. Another chuckled softly before disappearing into a conference room. Ethan heard every word, yet his expression never changed. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped measuring his worth by the opinions of strangers. He was here for one reason alone: to build a stable future for his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. She deserved school lunches that didn't require careful counting of every dollar. She deserved warm winters without worrying whether the furnace could keep running. Most of all, she deserved a father who never stopped trying. Upstairs, on the 42nd floor, the weekly executive hiring meeting had already begun. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of an impossibly long walnut conference table, reviewing the day's employment reports with the same disciplined focus that had built her billion-dollar company from a struggling startup into a national powerhouse. She rarely involved herself in entry-level hiring, but today something had drawn her into the room before sunrise. Even she couldn't explain why. The vice president casually slid another digital application onto the large presentation screen. "Next candidate," he announced. "Maintenance division. Janitorial services." Victoria barely looked up. Hundreds of applications crossed her desk every month. Most lasted only seconds before disappearing forever. Then the resume filled the screen. Name: Ethan Walker. Her fingers froze around the silver pen. The color quietly drained from her face. The room continued speaking, unaware that time itself seemed to stop for the woman at the head of the table. She stared at those two ordinary words as memories she had spent 15 years trying to understand suddenly rushed back with startling clarity. Around her, executives kept discussing salaries, schedules, and maintenance budgets. None of them noticed that their CEO was no longer listening. Victoria whispered the name so softly that only she could hear it. It can't be. Yet deep inside her heart, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years gently answered before anyone else could. It is. The interview room in the basement looked nothing like the elegant executive offices 42 floors above. The fluorescent lights hummed softly against a plain white ceiling. A coffee machine clicked in the corner beside a stack of paper cups that no one seemed interested in using. The gray carpet had faded from years of heavy footsteps, and the walls displayed framed company values that spoke about integrity, respect, and opportunity. Ethan Walker sat quietly in a simple chair outside the Human Resources office, his worn canvas folder resting neatly on his lap. Around him, several other applicants shifted nervously, checking their phones every few seconds or rehearsing answers beneath their breath. Ethan simply folded his hands together and waited. Patience had become part of who he was. 5 years earlier, he had measured life by promotions, deadlines, and impossible expectations. Now he measured it by whether Lily smiled before school, whether the refrigerator stayed full until Friday, and whether the old pickup truck started on the first turn of the key. Those victories mattered more than titles ever had. Back home, Lily would be sitting in her third-grade classroom wearing the same bright blue backpack she insisted was still perfect despite its patched shoulder strap. Before leaving that morning, she had wrapped her small arms around his waist and looked up with complete confidence. "You're going to get the job today, Daddy." Ethan smiled at the memory. "What makes you so sure?" She had shrugged as though the answer were obvious. "Because you always help people. Good things eventually find people like you." Children had a way of believing what adults slowly forgot. He carried those words with him now more carefully than the resume inside his folder. The office door opened. A middle-aged janitor rolled a cleaning cart into the hallway, stopping when he noticed Ethan. "Interview?" the older man asked with a friendly smile. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." The janitor extended his hand. "My name is Harold. I have worked here almost 20 years. Ethan stood immediately and shook it warmly. "It is nice to meet you, Harold." Harold laughed softly. "Most applicants barely notice me." Ethan answered without hesitation. "My father always said every honest job deserves respect." The older man's eyes softened. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Ethan replied quietly. "He taught me that character stays long after success comes and goes." Upstairs, the executive meeting had ended in complete confusion. Victoria Sterling remained seated long after every board member had left the room. The digital application still filled the large screen in front of her. Ethan Walker, age 39, residence, Cedar Grove. Emergency contact, Lily Walker, daughter. Employment history showed ordinary maintenance positions, warehouse work, seasonal construction, and delivery driving. Nothing explained why her heartbeat refused to slow. Nothing explained why one ordinary application had unsettled 15 years of carefully guarded memories. Her executive assistant stepped inside, carrying a tablet. "Your 10 o'clock meeting is ready." Victoria did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the applicant's name. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Delay every meeting until this afternoon." The assistant blinked in surprise. "Everything." Victoria stood slowly, smoothing the sleeve of her navy blazer as determination quietly replaced disbelief. "Everything," she repeated. "I want to personally observe the maintenance interviews." The assistant stared for a moment, completely puzzled. In 12 years, the billionaire founder had never attended a single janitorial interview. Yet without another explanation, Victoria walked toward the elevator, feeling as though every floor she descended was carrying her closer to a chapter of her life she had never truly left behind. The human resources manager smiled politely as Ethan entered the interview room and took the empty chair across the table. The questions were ordinary: availability, previous experience, willingness to work nights, weekends, and holidays. Ethan answered each one with quiet honesty, never exaggerating a single accomplishment or hiding a single hardship. When asked why he wanted the position, he paused for a brief moment before replying, "Because every family deserves stability, and my daughter deserves to see that no honest work is ever beneath her father." The room became unexpectedly quiet. Even the recruiter, making notes, stopped writing for a second before clearing his throat and continuing. Ethan never noticed. He had spoken from the heart, not to impress anyone, but because it was simply the truth. Just outside the room, Victoria Sterling stood behind the tinted observation glass that allowed executives to watch interviews without being seen. She had intended to stay only a few minutes, yet nearly half an hour had passed without her moving an inch. Every answer Ethan gave sounded remarkably familiar. Not the words themselves, but the calm behind them. 15 years earlier, she had met someone who spoke with that same quiet certainty. Someone who never tried to appear extraordinary. Someone who treated strangers with a kindness that seemed almost effortless. She closed her eyes for a brief second, but the memories refused to stay buried. Instead, they became sharper, clearer. Somewhere inside an old cedar keepsake box locked in the private cabinet of her office rested a faded hotel key card, a weathered emergency contact bracelet, and a handwritten note she had carried across every office, every home, and every chapter of success. The ink had begun to fade long ago, but one line remained perfectly readable. Ethan Walker. For years, investigators had searched. Private firms had searched. Even charitable organizations had quietly helped her look. Every trail had ended the same way. Nothing. No address. No forwarding records. No answers. Eventually, everyone else stopped believing he could ever be found. Victoria never did. The recruiter looked up from Ethan's application. Mr. Walker, this job includes cleaning executive offices after hours. Some applicants feel uncomfortable because they rarely receive recognition for their work. How do you feel about that? Ethan smiled gently. Recognition is a wonderful thing when it comes naturally, but I believe character is built by doing the right thing even when nobody notices. Behind the glass, Victoria slowly lowered her eyes. Her chest tightened with emotions she could barely understand. Those words reached somewhere deeper than memory. They reached the part of her life that money had never been able to heal. Down the hallway, Harold quietly pushed his cleaning cart past the observation room. He noticed the company's famous founder standing completely still behind the glass and politely nodded before continuing on his route. Victoria watched the elderly janitor disappear around the corner. There was genuine peace in the man's careful work, just as there was dignity in Ethan's presence. Suddenly, the title of janitor no longer seemed ordinary to her. It represented people who quietly restored order after everyone else had gone home. People who were rarely applauded, but whose work allowed others to succeed. She realized she had spent years building a company around innovation while overlooking the quiet heroes who kept it standing every single day. As Ethan finished answering the final question, the recruiter extended a courteous smile. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Walker. We will contact you within a few days." Ethan stood, gathered his folder, and shook every hand around the table before walking toward the door. Just as his fingers touched the handle, Victoria stepped away from the observation window. Her heartbeat quickened. She was no longer watching a possibility. She was about to stand face to face with the one person she had never truly stopped searching for. The hallway outside the interview room felt unusually quiet as Ethan stepped through the doorway with his canvas folder tucked beneath one arm. He nodded politely to the receptionist, thanked the recruiter once more, and began walking toward the lobby with the same calm, measured pace that had carried him through every difficult season of his life. He expected nothing more than another long wait for another hopeful phone call. Around him, employees hurried between meetings without noticing the man passing beside them. They saw another applicant leaving the building. They did not see the years of sacrifice hidden behind his steady eyes. Halfway down the corridor, Ethan noticed a young maintenance worker struggling to lift a heavy box of office supplies that had slipped from a rolling cart. Pens, folders, and printer paper scattered across the polished floor. Several people walked around the mess without slowing down. Ethan immediately set down his own folder and knelt to gather the supplies. "Let me give you a hand," he said with an easy smile. The young employee looked embarrassed. "Thank you. Everyone is in such a hurry today." Ethan carefully stacked the boxes back onto the cart before checking that nothing had been damaged. "Some things are more important than arriving somewhere 30 seconds earlier," he replied. The young man laughed softly. "I wish more people believed that." Ethan simply wished him a good day, picked up his folder, and continued toward the elevators without expecting gratitude. Behind a nearby corner, Victoria watched the entire exchange in complete silence. No cameras had been watching that hallway. No interview score depended on that simple act. There had been no audience to impress. Yet Ethan had stopped without hesitation, exactly as though helping another person was simply the natural thing to do. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment as another memory quietly returned. 15 years earlier, on a cold autumn afternoon, she had been a frightened 21-year-old college student standing alone after an unexpected emergency had left her shaken and overwhelmed. While dozens of strangers hurried past, one young man had stopped. He had spoken gently. He had stayed until she was safe. Before leaving, he had smiled with the same quiet kindness she had just witnessed again. He had never asked for recognition. He had simply disappeared back into his own life. All she had managed to remember afterward was his first and last name, spoken almost casually when she thanked him. Ethan Walker. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Ethan stepped inside, unaware that someone only a few yards away was struggling to steady emotions she had buried beneath years of success. Victoria remained motionless until the doors closed. Then she turned and walked quickly toward her private office. Once inside, she unlocked a walnut cabinet hidden behind a bookshelf and removed a small cedar box that showed gentle signs of age. She placed it carefully on her desk and slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested a faded hotel key card, a worn friendship bracelet, and a neatly folded piece of cream-colored paper. She unfolded it with extraordinary care. Time had softened the edges, but the handwriting remained unmistakable. At the bottom, beneath a brief message encouraging her to keep believing in herself even when life felt uncertain, was a simple signature. Ethan Walker. Victoria traced the name lightly with her fingertips before closing her eyes. A quiet tear escaped despite every effort to stop it. After all these years, she had finally found him. The only question left was whether he would remember a single afternoon that had become one of the defining moments of her entire life, or whether, for Ethan, it had simply been another ordinary act of kindness that never seemed important enough to remember. The next morning began with the soft glow of sunrise stretching across Cedar Grove as Ethan packed Lily's lunch before walking her to school. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, and a handwritten note tucked carefully inside her lunchbox that simply read, "Keep being kind. I love you, Dad." Lily hugged him tightly before skipping toward the school entrance, then turned around one last time to wave with complete confidence. "You're going to hear good news today." Ethan smiled, raising his hand in return. "I hope you are right, sweetheart." As she disappeared through the front doors, he looked toward the bright autumn sky and quietly whispered the same promise he had made every morning since losing his wife. "I will keep trying." Less than an hour later, his aging pickup rolled into the employee parking lot of Sterling Dynamics after an unexpected phone call asking him to return for what Human Resources described as a final discussion. Ethan assumed another applicant had declined the position or that additional paperwork was needed. He certainly did not imagine that the request had come directly from the executive office. Inside the building, Victoria Sterling stood beside the large windows overlooking the city, holding a fresh background report that she had requested overnight. Every page confirmed what Ethan himself had already shared. No hidden fortune, no remarkable career, no criminal record, no public recognition. Only years filled with honest work, temporary jobs, unpaid volunteer service at neighborhood food pantry, and glowing recommendations describing him with the same words over and over again. Reliable, humble, respectful, quiet. One former supervisor had written a single sentence that caught her attention more than anything else. "If character could be measured like profit, Ethan Walker would be the wealthiest man I have ever employed." Victoria slowly set the report down. Success had introduced her to brilliant executives, gifted investors, and celebrated innovators, yet very few people had ever been described with such simple admiration. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Her executive assistant stepped inside. "Mr. Walker has arrived." Victoria nodded, taking one slow breath before answering. "Please ask Mr. Collins from Human Resources to escort him on a short tour of the building before bringing him here." The assistant hesitated. "The executive floor?" Victoria smiled fondly. "Yes. I want him to see every part of the company before we speak." Downstairs, Ethan followed Human Resources manager Daniel Collins through quiet hallways lined with framed photographs celebrating company milestones. Collins pointed toward laboratories, conference rooms, and community outreach displays while explaining the culture of Sterling Dynamics. Ethan listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about employee volunteer programs and educational scholarships rather than executive perks or salaries. Collins found himself unexpectedly impressed. Most applicants wanted to know about vacation days or overtime opportunities. Ethan wanted to know whether the company treated people well. As they reached the executive floor, a young administrative assistant accidentally dropped a binder filled with hundreds of printed pages. documents scattered across the polished floor in every direction. Before anyone could react, Ethan knelt beside her and calmly began arranging every page back into numerical order. "Take your time," he said warmly after noticing the panic in her eyes. "Mistakes happen to all of us." She exhaled with visible relief. "Thank you. I thought everyone was going to be angry." Ethan handed her the completed binder with a reassuring smile. People deserve patience more often than criticism. Standing only a few feet away behind the partially open door of her office, Victoria witnessed everything once again. No cameras, no interview, no reward. Just another quiet decision made by a man who still had no idea that every ordinary act of kindness was gently answering questions she had carried in her heart for 15 long years. Daniel Collins thanked the administrative assistant for gathering the last of the scattered documents before leading Ethan toward the executive conference corridor. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. Plush carpets softened every footstep. Original paintings decorated the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, stretching for miles beneath a cloudless autumn sky. Ethan admired the view for only a moment before turning his attention back to Collins, asking thoughtful questions about the company's apprenticeship program for high school students. Collins smiled. Not many applicants ask about helping teenagers. Ethan shrugged gently. "Someone gave me encouragement when I was young. I have always hoped to pass that gift forward." Before Collins could respond, another voice interrupted from the opposite end of the hallway. "Daniel, I need a word." The speaker was Richard Holloway, Senior Vice President of Corporate Operations, a polished executive known throughout the company for demanding perfection from everyone beneath him. His tailored charcoal suit looked as sharp as his reputation. Richard glanced briefly toward Ethan before returning his attention to Collins. "Who is this?" Collins answered politely. "Final candidate for the maintenance department." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Maintenance?" His eyes drifted over Ethan's worn boots and neatly pressed but inexpensive shirt. "Interesting choice to bring him up here." Ethan remained silent. Collins calmly explained that the executive office had requested the tour personally. Richard's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The executive office has more important matters than janitorial interviews." He stepped closer, folding his arms. "Tell me something, Mr. Walker. Do you honestly believe you belong on this floor?" Collins looked uncomfortable, but Ethan answered without the slightest trace of offense. "No floor belongs to me, sir. I am simply grateful to stand wherever honest work is offered." Richard gave a quiet laugh that echoed against the marble walls. Diplomatic answer. He looked toward Collins. "We spend millions attracting world-class talent, and now executives are escorting custodial applicants through boardrooms. Fascinating use of company time." Ethan lowered his eyes respectfully. "If my visit has caused inconvenience, I sincerely apologize." Richard studied him for a long moment, almost expecting frustration or wounded pride. None came. Ethan's calm remained unshaken. That composure somehow irritated him even more. "You know," Richard continued, "people spend decades earning offices on this floor." Ethan nodded. "I respect that. And you're applying to clean them." "Yes, sir." Richard waited, expecting embarrassment to appear. Instead, Ethan smiled gently. "Every office deserves to be cared for. Every workplace deserves to welcome people into a clean environment. There's honor in helping others do their best work." Silence settled over the hallway. Collins glanced down, unable to hide his admiration. Several nearby employees who had quietly overheard the conversation stopped pretending to organize folders and simply listened. Richard forced a thin smile. "That is a noble speech." Ethan answered softly. "Is simply how I was raised." Unknown to everyone except one person, the entire exchange had unfolded on a security monitor inside Victoria Sterling's office. She had not instructed anyone to challenge Ethan, yet she watched carefully as every unexpected moment revealed another piece of the man she remembered. Not once had he defended his pride. Not once had he answered disrespect with resentment. He had chosen dignity every single time. Victoria slowly stood from her chair and walked toward the conference room door. 15 years ago, she had wondered whether kindness like his could survive the weight of adulthood. Today, every quiet test had given the same answer. Outside, Richard finally stepped aside with a courteous gesture that carried little warmth. "Very well, Mr. Walker. I hope you find what you are looking for here." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I hope all of us do." Daniel Collins opened the polished walnut door at the end of the corridor and motioned for Ethan to step inside. "Please wait here for just a moment," he said with a courteous smile before quietly leaving the room. The office was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Shelves filled with books lined one wall, while photographs of community projects, scholarship recipients, and employee volunteer events decorated another. Despite the elegance, the room felt surprisingly warm rather than intimidating. Ethan remained standing instead of sitting in one of the leather chairs. He believed another person's office deserved the same respect as another person's home. A few moments later, the side door opened softly. Victoria Sterling entered without an entourage, carrying only a slim folder in one hand. She wore the same composed expression the business world knew so well, yet inside her heart, every step felt heavier than the last. Ethan turned immediately. "Good morning, ma'am. Victoria Ismail Pelaitli." "Good morning, Mr. Walker. Thank you for waiting." She invited him to sit, but Ethan waited until she had taken her own seat before doing the same. That small gesture did not escape her notice. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt as though time itself had slowed, waiting for something important to happen. Victoria finally opened the folder in front of her, though she barely glanced at the papers inside. "Your interview received excellent feedback," she said. "Everyone described you as respectful, dependable, and remarkably calm under pressure." Ethan lowered his eyes modestly. "That is kind of them to say. Do you always answer criticism with patience?" she asked. Ethan thought carefully before replying. "Not always. I simply try to remember that every person carries struggles I cannot see." Victoria studied him quietly. Those words echoed with the same gentle wisdom she remembered hearing years ago. She leaned back slightly and asked another question that seemed unrelated to employment. "Have you always lived in Cedar Grove?" Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. I moved there after my wife passed away. Before that, life took me to several different places." "Including Boston?" she asked almost casually. Ethan looked up with mild surprise. "Yes. For a short time, many years ago." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. She continued carefully. "Do you remember volunteering at St. Matthew Community Center during your college years?" Ethan blinked once, searching through memories that had long settled into the background of his life. "I volunteered at several community programs," he answered honestly. "St. Matthew's was one of them." Victoria's fingers tightened gently around the edge of the folder. There was an autumn fundraiser held at the Old Harbor View Hotel. Ethan's expression softened as distant memories slowly resurfaced. "I remember the event. There was a terrible storm that afternoon. The power went out for a while." Victoria nodded almost imperceptibly. "Do you remember meeting a young woman there?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds. He closed his eyes briefly, as though sorting through countless faces from another lifetime. Finally, he smiled with quiet uncertainty. "There were many people that day. I remember speaking with someone who seemed frightened after everything became so confusing, but I never learned what happened to her afterward." Victoria looked down, hiding the emotion rising in her eyes. 15 years had passed, yet he remembered the moment itself rather than any expectation of gratitude. He had never searched for recognition because, to him, kindness had never been a transaction. Slowly, she reached into the folder and removed a single folded sheet of cream-colored paper. Without saying another word, she placed it gently on the desk between them. Ethan looked at the familiar handwriting, then at the faded signature resting at the bottom of the page. His own name stared back at him, and for the first time since entering the building, genuine astonishment crossed his face. Ethan picked up the folded paper with extraordinary care, as though he were afraid time itself might crumble in his hands. His eyes moved slowly across the familiar handwriting until they reached the final line. A faint smile appeared, followed by a quiet look of surprise that softened every feature on his face. "I remember this," he whispered. "I wrote it on the back of the event program because there was no notebook nearby." Victoria nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I have carried it with me for 15 years. Ethan looked up, genuinely puzzled. "You kept it all this time?" She answered with complete honesty. "It reminded me that the worst day of my life did not have to become the rest of my life." Silence settled gently between them. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected across rows of glass buildings, while far below the city continued moving without knowing that two ordinary lives had unexpectedly crossed paths once again. Ethan carefully returned the paper to the desk. "I wish I could tell you I remembered your face immediately," he said. "I'm sorry that I did not." Victoria smiled through glistening eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for. You never expected anything in return." Ethan leaned back slightly, searching his memory. "I remember meeting a young woman who felt completely overwhelmed. I remember telling her that difficult seasons never stay forever. My mother used to tell me that hope grows quietly long before anyone can see it." Victoria laughed softly through her emotion. "You said something else." Ethan tilted his head. "Did I?" She nodded. "You said that the strongest people are not the loudest people. They are the ones who keep choosing kindness after disappointment." Ethan smiled with gentle embarrassment. "That certainly sounds like something my parents would have taught me." Victoria opened the cedar box resting beside her chair and placed it on the desk. One by one, she showed him the keepsakes she had preserved through every promotion, every business victory, and every public celebration. The faded hotel key card, the friendship bracelet, the handwritten note. "Whenever I doubted myself," she admitted, "I opened this box. I remembered that one stranger believed I could build a meaningful future before I believed it myself." Ethan looked at the simple collection with quiet disbelief. "I only spent an afternoon talking with you." Victoria slowly shook her head. "No, you spent an afternoon reminding me that my future was worth fighting for with hope instead of fear." Ethan lowered his eyes, humbled by words he never imagined hearing. "I think you became who you are because of your own courage." "Perhaps," Victoria replied softly. "But courage often begins because someone else chooses compassion first." A gentle knock interrupted the moment. Daniel Collins opened the door slightly. "I apologize for disturbing you. The executive leadership meeting begins in 5 minutes." Victoria looked toward him before answering without hesitation. "Please tell everyone I will be there shortly." Daniel nodded and quietly closed the door again. Ethan began gathering his folder. "I appreciate you sharing this with me," he said sincerely. "No matter what happens with the position, I am grateful to know your life turned out so well." Victoria watched him stand, realizing that even now he believed the conversation had simply been about an old memory. He still expected nothing. No special treatment. No reward. Only the opportunity to earn an honest living. She slowly rose from her chair and met his eyes with calm determination. "Mr. Walker," she said gently, "before you leave this office, there is something the entire executive board needs to hear, and I believe it is finally time for them to learn why your name has meant so much to me for the past 15 years. Victoria opened the executive boardroom doors and invited Ethan to walk beside her rather than behind her. The conversation around the long conference table faded almost instantly. Senior executives looked up from financial reports, market forecasts, and quarterly projections with visible confusion. Richard Holloway frowned as Ethan entered the room carrying nothing but his worn canvas folder. No one understood why an applicant for a maintenance position had been brought into the company's highest meeting. Victoria remained standing at the head of the table, but did not take her seat. Instead, she looked around the room with unusual calm before speaking. "Before we begin today's agenda, there is someone I want every one of you to meet." Richard exchanged puzzled glances with several board members. "Victoria," he began carefully, "perhaps this discussion would be more appropriate after we finish the meeting." She smiled politely without taking her eyes off the room. "This discussion is the meeting. The boardroom became completely silent. Victoria turned toward Ethan. 15 years ago, before Sterling Dynamics existed before, investors believed in me before I believed in myself. I experienced one of the most difficult days of my life. Every executive listened without interruption. Hundreds of people crossed my path that afternoon. Only one person stopped long enough to remind me that my future still mattered. He expected nothing in return. He accepted no reward. He simply chose kindness because that was the kind of man he was. She gently lifted the faded handwritten note for everyone to see. I have carried this with me through every board meeting, every business decision, and every major milestone this company has celebrated. Richard's confident expression slowly disappeared. Victoria looked toward Ethan with quiet gratitude. The man who wrote these words has spent the last 15 years working honest jobs, raising his daughter with dignity, and continuing to help strangers who cannot repay him. Yesterday, many people in this building saw only an applicant for a janitorial position. I saw the man whose compassion changed the direction of my entire life. No one spoke. The silence felt deeper than any presentation or financial report could have created. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing the attention belonged somewhere else. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I never wanted recognition for something that should have been ordinary. Victoria Smaid Guormri. That is exactly why you deserve respect." She turned back toward the board. Character is the foundation upon which every lasting company must stand. Skills can be taught. Experience can be gained. Integrity is chosen every single day. Richard slowly lowered his eyes, remembering every dismissive word he had spoken in the hallway only hours earlier. After a long pause, he stood from his chair and faced Ethan directly. "Mr. Walker, I owe you an apology. I judged your value by your position instead of your character. I was wrong." Ethan offered the same gentle smile he had shown throughout the entire day. "Thank you. We all make quick judgments sometimes. What matters is what we choose after we recognize them." A quiet sense of relief spread through the room. Victoria then placed a simple employment folder on the table. Between them, "Mr. Walker, if you're still willing, I would be honored to welcome you to Sterling Dynamics." Ethan glanced at the folder before looking back at her. "I applied to become a janitor because honest work is enough for me. Victoria Nadif. Then that position is yours if it is the one you truly want. But I also hope you will help us build something even greater. I want every new employee to learn what real leadership looks like, not from titles, but from the quiet dignity you have shown every person who crossed your path." Ethan thought of Lily's words that morning. Good things eventually find people like you. He smiled softly and accepted the folder with both hands. As the afternoon sunlight filled the boardroom, no one applauded. No one needed to. The silence itself carried the deepest respect, and for the first time in many years, two lives connected by one forgotten act of kindness quietly stepped into a future neither of them had ever expected.